And good day everyone. I am Maria Desivy de Loyola, a group member from Group 6, and I will be the first reporter to talk about the Chapter 6, which contains the topic ethics. So at the end of this chapter, students are expected to recommend actions to observe ethical standards in testing. So before we proceed to our discussion, let's have first a quick topic overview. So we have here Russell and Irashan in 2012, and it says there that they define assessment as more than just a technical activity, or it is a human activity. They also explain that assessment has consequences to students and other stakeholders. So if makarecall mo sa relevance and roles of assessment, we have their teachers, as well as students, administrators, policyholders, and other stakeholders nga mo take og assessment. So assessment is used to form judgments on the nature, scope, and extent for students' learning. Then they also added that teachers' assessments have important long-term and short-term consequences for students. Thus, teachers have an ethical responsibility to make decisions using the most valid and reliable information possible. So kaning nga chapter, it centers on ethical issues and responsibilities of teachers in the assessment process. We have here our learning key point, which is ethics in assessment centers on fairness. Fairness is an ethical value, diba? And of course, validity and reliability are aspects of fairness. So karong adlaw, we're gonna talk about our subtopics, which is the other aspects of fairness. So this will include in our discussion, first, students' knowledge of learning, targets and assessments. Second, opportunity to learn. Third, the prerequisite knowledge and skills. Fourth, avoiding student stereotyping. Fifth, avoiding bias in assessment tasks and procedures. And lastly, accommodating special needs. So the first subtopic or the first aspect of fairness nga atong pagkastoryaan today is the student's knowledge of learning targets and assessment. So this aspect of fairness speaks of transparency. So we have here transparency, which was defined as disclosure of information to students about assessments. So this includes what learning outcomes are to be assessed and evaluated, assessment methods and formats, weighting of items, allocated time in completing the assessment, and grading criteria or rubric. So, by informing students regarding the assessment details, they can adequately prepare and recognize the importance of assessment. So, kani siya mahimong part sa assessment process. By doing so, assessment becomes learner-centered. How to become a teacher in the future. So, we have to possess this aspect. We have to be transparent to our students. Very important dyan siya. Kaya if not, daghan kang ma-engage ng mga concerns gikan sa imong mga estudyante, labi na nga we are teaching elementary level students. So the very first concern nga imong ma-engage gikan sa imong estudyante if you are not transparent to them is kanidyong maghatag kag exam nga you are not providing or informing them the test coverage. Kay bawo ko nga makarelate mo tanan kay naadyoy mga teachers nga dili bitaw mo hatagog ka ng mga unsay i-include o i-exclude sa exam, and student starts to kana bitong murag mayabag kay wa sila kabaw kung unsa ilang tun-an, and wasad sila kay baw kung unsa ang scope or ang limitation sa imong exam. In order to be fair sa imong mga estudyante, as a future teacher or as a teacher, you will give them a hint to what is included and excluded to your test to help them evaluate their strategies and current levels of understanding. Next is the absence of criteria. So aside from the content, the criteria should be known or made public to your students. So it would be unfair for your students if you give them a performance assessments without telling them the criteria. So in order to be fair, The criteria should be divulged prior to assessment so that students will know what the teacher is looking for in the actual performance. From that, if you provide the criteria beforehand to your students, they can reflect and evaluate their work performance and make the necessary improvements before the scheduled work submission. Then next is not providing samples. So kanisya for product-based assessments, it would be instrumental if teachers or ikaw as a teacher can provide a sample to your students of the work done by your previous students para sa they can acknowledge the kind or quality of work you are expecting from them. And of course, dapat jud i-emphasize nimo ang originality kay basin sad if mag-provide kag sample sa mga estudyante labi na elementary, basin mao jud to ilang sundugon. So mao na siya. The next is surprise quizzes. So mao jud ni siya ang pinaka daghan or pinaka major nga concern sa uban. So kanang naay mga teachers nga would defend and rationalize their giving of unannounced assessments nga daghan ko nung study ang nag-support ana. Study ang ni-support nga ang kani ko ng unannounced quizzes kay it will raise the test scores of mid-range undergraduate students, and majority of students in his sample claim to appreciate the use of quizzes. Siguro sa no because daghang feedback process ang na-involve mo na nga they found out nga unannounced quizzes kuno kay makamotivate sa students. Then it would be very unfair sa students man good. Okay, and disadvantage man good sa unannounced quizzes kay it will compel students to come to class prepared, and we could not discount the possibility nga ang kanang mga unannounced quizzes mo generate og anxiety sa mga estudyante. And Graham supported or stated that unannounced quizzes tend to increase the examination tension and stress and did not offer a fair examination at all. The test-taking skills. So for instance, some of your students are good in answering multiple choice test items. Then they have developed test-taking skills and strategies like ilang basahon una mga directions, mag-answer sila sa mga easy items first, or na sila strategy kung saan nila pag-answer, or familiar na sila sa kana nga type sa exam. So relative to what I have mentioned, so ang teachers should not create an unusual hybrids of assessment formats. Like, ang naandan sa estudyante is kana ang matching type is composed of 2 columns. Then you provided 3 columns. So that would leave your students perplexed, deciphering the test format rather than having them show how well they've learned to this subject matter. So para sa fair sa tanan, dapat sad imong tagaan o hint imong student or tagaan nimo or i-familiarize nimo ang mga test strategies before sila mo take sa exam. Next aspect of fairness is the opportunity to learn. There are lots of instances that teachers are forced to give reading assignments because of the breadth of content that has to be covered in addition to limited or loss of classroom time. So ang mahitabuan ni there is little or no instruction that follows. Then this certain situation will put students to a disadvantage because they were not given an ample time and resources to sufficiently assimilate the material. As if nga they are being penalized for lack of opportunity ba. So Macmillan asserted that fair assessments are aligned with instruction that provides adequate time and opportunities for all students to learn. So in order to be fair, so the teacher should give the students an ample time nga makastudy, makabasa ug makareflect sila sa mga resources or sa material nga imong gisend or gihatag nila. Note that inadequate instructional approaches would not be just for the learners because they are not given enough experience to process information and develop their skills. So, ang mahitabuan ni they will be ill-prepared for a summative test or a performance assessment. Aspect of fairness, or the third aspect of fairness, is the prerequisite knowledge and skills. So, prerequisite knowledge and skills is the foundation upon which new knowledge is built and scaffolded, or this can be a form of remediation to students. So students may perform poorly in an assessment if they do not possess background knowledge and skills. So if they lack adequate knowledge, then they would not fully grasp the concept of a certain topic. And so, it would be improper if ang estudyante kay gitagaan ni mog test sa topic without any attempt or effort to address the gap in knowledge or skills. So, ang problema is compounded if there are misconceptions. So, that's why we have the need for action and correction is more critical. So, as not to be unfair, so dapat ang teacher must identify early on the prerequisite skills necessary for completing an assessment. Then the teacher can analyze the assessment items and procedures and determine the pieces of knowledge and skills required to answer them. Then after Ana, the teacher can administer a prior knowledge assessment, the results of which can lead to additional or supplemental teachers or students manage activities like peer-assisted study sessions or any groupings. So, diha na masud like maghatag kag remedial. Yes, remedial. So, mo na ang ubang teacher kay mo-provide og kanang mga reinforced tutorials or advise students to attend supplemental instruction sessions possible. So, prerequisites are imposed to ensure that students possess background knowledge and skills necessary to advance and become successful in subsequent courses. So, the rest of aspects of fairness will be taught by Miss Davin and Miss Comajes.
So, what is avoiding stereotyping? Avoiding stereotyping is a stereotype in generalization group of people based on inclusive observation of a small sample of this group. Stereotyping is caused by preconceived judgments of people comes in contact with which are sometimes unintended. Stereotyping can also affect the student's performance at school. In 1995, Stell and Aronson developed the theory of stereotype threat, claiming that for people who are challenged in areas they deem important, like intellectual ability. How to reduce the negative effect of stereotype threat? Simple. Just change the classroom instructions and assessment can be implemented, such as encouraging diverse students that they can excel in difficult tasks, that ANA responsible students can achieve high standards, and also by ensuring gender-free and unculturally unbiased test items. Avoiding bias in assessment tasks and procedures. Assessment must be free from bias. Fairness demands that all learners are given equal chance to do well from the task and get a good assessment from the rater. There are the two forms of bias: the unfair penalization and offensiveness. Unfair penalization harms students' performance due to test content. Not because items are offensive, but rather the content caters of some particular groups from the same economic class, gender, and etc. Offensives happens if test takers get distressed, upset, or distracted about how an individual or a particular group is portrayed in the test.
So, hi everyone, I will be the last reporter and I will be tackling about the accommodating special needs, relevance, and ethical issues in Chapter 6. So, let's start with the accommodating special needs. The legal basis for accommodation is contained in Section 12 of Republic Act 7277, entitled An Act Providing for the Rehabilitation, Self-Development, and Self-Reliance of a Disabled Person in their integration into the mainstream of society and for other purposes. So this provision talks about access to quality education, that learning institutions should consider the special needs of learners with disabilities in terms of facilities, class schedules, physical education requirements, and other related matters. So the school should consider the special needs of learners. That would be the key word there. Next is another in Another is Section 32 of Jade Memorandum 09 2013 on Enhanced Policies and Guidelines on Student Affairs and Services, which states that higher education institutions should ensure that academic accommodation is made available to persons with disabilities and learners with special needs. So, the academic accommodation must be available to the person with disabilities or the learners with special needs. They must provide the learners enough quality educations, enough facilities that will cater to students. So, next is that accommodation does not mean giving advantages to students with learning disabilities, but rather than it allowed them to demonstrate their knowledge on assessments without hindrances from the disabilities. So it is distinct from assessment. Modification. Accommodation does not insinuate altering the construct of the assessment. What the assessment was intended to measure in the first place. So the accommodation cannot only make the students, lazy, but it will help students to be motivated in the school in learning. So accommodations can be placed in one of 6 categories by Turlow, McGray, Tyndall, Thompson, and Esseldike 2000. So the first one is presentation. So in presentation, you should repeat. You will present something like you need to present a picture, something you like, a print. So repeat directions as an example. An example is read aloud and use large print. So as what I said, then braille. Next is response. Mark answers in text booklet. Permit response via digital recorder or computer, and use reference materials like dictionary. So response, from the word response, you will respond to the students if they have questions, or like when they answer the assignments, you can have some comments on their works. Next is setting. Study carrel, separate room. Setting is like study carrel, separate room. Preferential seating, individualized or small groups, or special, and then special lighting. So setting, so it's like the place, where does the students want. So it's like preferential seating, so what they preferred, where they prefer to sit. And then individualized or small group, so you will accommodate them through like making them into a group. Next is timing. Extended time, frequent breaks, and unlimited time. So that would be in timing. The next is scheduling. So you will accommodate the students through scheduling. So you will give them a specific time of the day, sub-test in different order, administer tests in several time sessions. So there must be a time. You will not just tell them that I'll give you some quiz or what without giving time. So next is, and the last is others. So like special test preparation techniques and out of level tests. So this others is like a surprise, something like a surprise test, or like an evaluation if to the students if they learn something in your lesson. So next is, let's move on to the 3 important elements of accommodation. So fundamentally, an assessment accommodation should attend to the particular need of the student concerned. For instance, presentation and setting are important considerations for a learner who is visually impaired. So, for a learner diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder or ADHD, frequent breaks are needed during a test because of the child's short attention span. So, to ensure the appropriateness of the accommodation supplied, it should take into account three important elements. So, these are the three important elements. The first important element is the nature and extent of the learner's disability. So, accommodation is dictated by the type and degree of disability possessed by the learner. So, a learner with moderate visual impairment would need a larger print edition of the assessment or special lighting condition. Of course, a different type of accommodation is needed if the child has severe visual loss. So, you need to know that if the students can clearly see your visuals. Okay, so next is type and format of assessment. So accommodation is matched to the type and format of assessment given. Accommodations vary depending on the length of the assessment, the time allotted or mode of response, and etc. A partially deaf child would not require assistance in a written test, right? So, however, his or her hearing impairment would affect his or her performance should the test be dictated. So, he or she also have difficulty in assessment tasks characterized by group discussions like roundtable sessions. So, type and format. So, you need to know what type of assessment you will do to the students, because the deaf, they can't hear you, right? So deaf person, so you need to write the assessment, the type of lesson to the students. So next is the competency and content being assessed. So accommodation does not alter the level of performance or content the assessment measures. So in science, permitting students to have a list of scientific formulae during a test is acceptable if the teacher is assessing how students are able to apply the formulae and not simple recall. Right? So in mathematics, if the objective is to add and subtract, counting numbers quickly, extended time would not be a reasonable accommodation. So, are we understood? So the next is, let's talk about the relevance. So relevance can also be thought of as an aspect of fairness. A relevant assessment would mean a short-changing students of worthwhile assessment experiences. Assessment should be set in a context that students will find purposeful or gave additional criteria for achieving quality assessment. So the assessment should be relevant, okay, to the students' needs. So there are three important things to know about the relevance of the assessment. So assessment should reflect the knowledge and skills that are most important for students to learn. So assessment should not include irrelevant and trivial content. Instead, it should measure learners' higher order abilities such as critical thinking, problem solving, and creativity, which are 21st century skills. These skills are essential if one is to be productive and competitive in today's global society. So teachers are reminded that when aiming for a high levels of performance, assessment should not curtail students' sense of creativity and personality in their work. Rather, it should foster initiative and innovation among students. So next is assessment should support every student's opportunity to learn things that are important. So assessment must provide genuine opportunities for students to show what they have learned and encourage reflective thinking. It should prompt them to explore what they think is important. This can be done, for example, using August KWL Know Want Learn chart as a learning and assessment tool. So it activates students' prior knowledge and personal curiosity and encourage inquiry and research. So the teacher must support the students' opportunity to learn things that are important, not irrelevant. So next is assessment should tell teachers and individual students something that they do not already know. Assessment should stretch students' ability and understanding. Assessment tasks should allow them to apply their knowledge in new situations. In a constructivism classroom, assessment can generate new knowledge by scaffolding prior knowledge. So assessment should tell teachers and the students something that they do not already know. So you need to apply new knowledge to them so that they can learn many things, okay, that are relevant, not irrelevant. So the last one is ethical issues. So there are times when assessment is not called for. Asking pupils to answer sensitive questions like their sexuality or problems in the family are unwanted, especially without the content of the parents. Grades and reports of teachers generated from using invalid and unreliable test instruments are unjust. Resulting interpretation are inaccurate and misleading. Other ethical issues in testing and research that may arise include possible harm to the participants, confidentiality of results, and deception in regard to the purpose and use of the assessment, and temptation to assist students in answering tests or responding to survey. So, ethical issues. The teachers must not leak, like for example, leak the grades of the students if they fail. For example, if they fail, the teachers must not leak the scores to other sections, or that will become a shame to them. So the teachers must consider some issues, some ethical issues, that it should not be leaked. And then other things is like physical, like they will slap, or if they get angry to the student. So they should not harm the students. So physical harm, they should not harm the students in any means, whatever means that they should not harm the students. So that would be all our report, and I hope you understand. Thank you.